Thanks for tuning in, guys, to the 2019 Selection Monday show. This is NCRHA Coast to Coast. I'm Kevin Smith. I'm joined by a couple of current players and NCRHA Coast to Coast team members. We have Ethan Clearfield from Miami of Ohio who's here with us, and Dominic Stankiewicz from Henry Ford College, both out of the MCRHL. And we've got a couple other guys joining us later too. Corey Eisenband from the ECRHA's Endicott College. They won Division III in the ECRHA, the conference champions in Division III. And then we'll also have Ryan Dunn hopefully joining us as well from Denver out of the Rocky Mountain Conference. They won Division III out there as well. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do a little bit of a recap on the conference championships that have occurred the last 2 weekends. The weekend prior was the Great Plains Conference, and we're going to start there, and then we'll jump into the remaining conference championships, which were held just over the last few days. As I'm sure a lot of the guys listening know, and we're playing in these events. And with Selection Monday, we've got bids that'll be coming out here in the next hour and a half. We're going to try to make sure we have all the bids out and released to you guys, and the show wrapped up no later than 11 o'clock Eastern. So I think we'll be able to get out of here a little bit before then, but we'll be receiving the bids directly from the league and broadcasting those when we get them. So make sure you stick around, and we'll have those coming at you live, and they'll also be posted on the NCRHA website. But we're going to start here with a little bit of a recap, as I just mentioned. And we're going to talk about the the Great Plains first, and then we'll jump over to the SEC, the SCHL, the Rocky Mountain, and onwards as we recap our conference championships. So the Great Plains went first. They had their conference championship last weekend, and it was I think a surprise to some. Now, people that have been following the Lindenwood-Bethel rivalry for a long time may not be as surprised by the results, as Bethel's really put a lot of work into their program, and the guys that compose that team, while they have a much shorter roster, they're skating all the time together and working their butts off, and they've definitely seen it all kind of come to fruition this season. They were able to defeat Lindenwood in a best 2 of 3 series, which gave them the first conference championship over Lindenwood, their first one since joining the Great Plains. And I think not just a milestone for their program in Division I, they also were able to win the Division IV conference championship, the first time that they were able to do that as well in the Great Plains. Bethel used to be in the SEC a few years ago, and they had won some conference championships there, but nothing before in the Great Plains. So Bethel was able to squeak out a win Friday night in their first game in Division I. Lindenwood won the second game 6-4, and that third game, that was the deciding game Saturday night, ended up going to Bethel. Jimmy Teed was the first star of the game with 49 saves, which is quite incredible. And Jimmy, a fellow Coast to Coast contributor, who's done a lot over the past couple of years, bringing us analysis and an insight from his perspective, which is always interesting and thoughtful. So a great job by Bethel being able to squeak out that win, and in Division I, and then in Division IV, they won that series 2-0 with 4 wins. So all close games between those two programs, and I'm sure that Lindenwood will be ready to seek some revenge when the national championships roll around, as they will for sure be going in both of those divisions. So that's how D1 and D4 played out. And then D2 and D3, we saw in Division II, Kansas State easily sweeping Mizzou with 11-1 and 12-1 wins. that's definitely a team to watch. Kansas State, as they always are, always a top contender in Division II, and I think this year will be no different. They've been a powerhouse program over the past 15 years or so, and one of the oldest programs in the country. So always a team to watch out for. The Schulte brothers, a deadly combination in terms of being able to put pucks in the net, and they move the puck really well. So that team is always somebody to watch out for. And then in Division III, probably the most competitive division out of the between D2 and D3. And I mean, in terms of a couple of these teams that have gone back and forth all season, Maryville was able to defeat Missouri S&T in the final, and Central Missouri and Illinois State were the 3 and 4 teams there. But Maryville and Missouri S&T had some good games throughout the season, and Maryville with the 5-3 win to secure the Great Plains Conference Championship for them, and so they will get the automatic bid coming out of the Great Plains. Ben Ekberg and Steven Steger both looked really good for the Bulldogs, and I think that that could be a team coming out of the Great Plains. Usually that top team in all those divisions coming out of the Great Plains, usually pretty competitive when Nationals rolls around. So that was the Great Plains. The Rocky Mountain Conference did not have a conference championship. It was decided in the regular season, and Denver University was able to secure that title. An interesting story with that program, and hopefully something we'll be able to get into either later tonight or before Nationals with Ryan Dunn, who's been writing some great articles earlier in the season and kind of the past year and a half. A former Syracuse University player, he transferred over to Denver and ended up taking over the program there, and was able to put a team together that went from losing pretty handedly throughout the first semester of the year, and bringing a team to battle the rest of the season out. And they also went and played in the Great Plains and had some competitive games, which gives us a good reference point. They were as to where they were with some of these other teams. They lost to Kansas State 7-3 and lost to Maryville 5-4. So they're kind of right there in that, at that same tiered level as a Maryville, and definitely a step or two behind a team like Kansas State. But this is a team that was getting blown out in the first semester by Colorado, and then ended up being able to defeat them handedly by 8 or 9 goals down the stretch to secure the Rocky Mountain Championship and the automatic bid. The SCHL, another Division III only conference with just a few teams. And when we look at the SCHL, it was pretty much all Sam Houston throughout the regular season. This was a team that was able to go undefeated in the regular season, and able to secure, or 11-1 actually. They did end up losing a game, and I believe they were able to secure their conference championship, and they'll be getting that automatic bid. But a lot of close games there in the SCHL between some of these teams. Texas Tech was able to split with them a couple of times, or was the only team that was able to beat Sam Houston. But Texas Tech and Louisiana Tech had some games, and Louisiana Tech not the same team as we've seen in the past, but one of those programs that has been able to keep a team around, and somehow year after year, being in Louisiana, not exactly a hockey or roller hockey hotbed, but able to field a team and play in some competitive games against some really good teams. And while it was a small conference, I think both Sam Houston State and Texas Tech will have a shot, as they had some good games down the stretch. Now, I don't know if Texas Tech is going to be going or if they will be if they're able to receive a bid. But that's something that we'll be able to find out down the stretch here as we get in contact with the NCRHA and get some of these bids out. So that was kind of the first few conferences, and some of the smaller conferences. When we look at the SEC, that's a slightly bigger conference this year than the few that we've gone over already, and we're gonna kind of get into a little bit of SEC talk here, but I want to make sure that I get Ethan Clearfield here in on the conversation. Ethan, what are your thoughts on some of these teams? I know you haven't seen the teams that we've discussed this year, but in years past, I know you may have seen a few or know some of these guys from playing in the travel summer tournaments and etc. So any thoughts on the first few conferences?
Yeah, sure. Hey, Kev, happy to be on talking about roller hockey. From first few conferences, definitely interested in that Colorado, Denver, what happened out over there. Impressive to see Denver come back and win a couple games there towards the end of the season, which you touched on there. It should be interesting to see if both of those teams get a bid out of the Rocky Mountains out to nationals in D3. Down in the South, yeah, you had Louisiana Tech definitely dropped off a little bit this year, but Texas Tech should be interesting at 7-5. They did pull off that one upset against Sam Houston, who I think has a good opportunity to make some noise at nationals there. That one poll that came out from the East Coast, I think had them around like 8 or 10 or so. I would expect they might give a good run here at nationals. But yeah, I'm excited to talk a little bit about Southeast and a couple of the other conferences. You there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, good. Yeah, I know that Texas Tech and one of those teams, as you mentioned, and it's tough with some of these conferences that don't get to travel much or don't play teams that do get to travel. But I know, we talked about the Great Plains a little bit, and as we mentioned, Maryville, they've got a very strong team, a deep team. They only lost one Division III game this season, and with some solid goaltending and a few guys, Steven Steger and Alex Henricks are two names that pop off the score sheet consistently for them. But they've got a full deep team with Dean Karanzis in net and a few other guys there. So that's definitely going to be a good Division III team. Illinois State and Missouri S&T, those other two teams to keep an eye out on. In the SEC, as we kind of move forward, Virginia Tech in Division III was able to handle James Madison pretty well throughout the year, and they won their conference championship in those two games. Now, the Hokies only played that one other D3 team this season. Besides James Madison, they lost 8-4 to Hofstra out in New Jersey earlier this season. So that's kind of a little bit of a reference point for the guys out east that have seen Hofstra, and as well as the West Coast guys, because I know Hofstra took a trip out to California earlier this year. And that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of where Virginia Tech will be going into nationals if they accept their automatic bid. Kevin Connolly was in net, and for the Hokies, and the Hesse brothers and Alex Nagelli are going to be their guys that would be able to keep them in games should they go to nationals. So that's kind of out of the Southeast. That's Division III. Now, Division II was pretty interesting with Kennesaw State going 11-2-1 on the year. Now, Florida State, another really impressive team who had quite a run last year, and is a team that even 2 years ago, having not received a bid at nationals, was one of those teams that a lot of people have been kind of keeping an eye on. And Russ Buchanan's done a great job behind the bench with that team and kind of taking the reins. And now that they have a rink that they can skate out of, which they didn't for a while, but having a rink in Tallahassee Indoor Sports, and the support of the facility has been really good for them. Now this year, they had close games with Kennesaw State all year, and they were able to beat them a couple of times early in the semester, beating them 8-3 and 6-3. But when we got to the conference championships here last weekend, it was a 4-3 overtime loss for the Noles, falling to Kennesaw State in what was probably one of the better games that occurred all conference championships across the country. Just a good relatively low scoring compared to some of the other scores we've seen. 4-3, not a defensive shutdown stalwart kind of game, but just good back and forth roller hockey. And that second game was kind of where the floodgates were let loose a little bit, and Kennesaw ended up defeating Florida State 8-2. But Florida State, a really strong team, definitely a team that I expect to be seeing. But it's hard to say because there are a good amount of D2 teams that are in the running here, and there are going to be a couple teams that probably are on the outside looking in after tonight. Now I don't know if Florida State would fall into that category. I doubt it, but especially after just looking at their non-conference games as well. But Florida Gulf Coast, the Division I team out of the SEC, they'll receive their automatic bid as a D1 team, and they had a good season as well. They were able to defeat Arizona State and UC Santa Barbara when they went out to California. And had a couple of close games in Palatine at the start of the event, but fell to Michigan State and Slippery Rock, and then had a couple of losses to Lindenwood and Bethel. They finished their season with some games against D2 teams as well as against Bethel. And Kennesaw State actually defeated them 6-5 in overtime about halfway through February, which was a big win for Kennesaw State and kind of that indicator that they're a top team to watch this year in Division II. Florida State, not a joke of a team. There's no doubt about that. They're a real solid team, and for a D2 team to take them down just shows you how solid Kennesaw should be going into nationals. I also want to make sure that we have a couple other of guests that are going to hop on throughout the show, and one of them is Dominic Stankiewicz, who plays for Henry Ford College in the JC division. Dom, if you're there, feel free to hop on. Are you there? Awesome, man. Let's bring you into the conversation here. I know, coming from the JC division, you get to play against teams from a lot of different conferences, and you're really involved in the sport. So I know guys from teams all over the place. Any insight to add here as we kind of wrap up the first four conferences and get into the, I would say, meat and potatoes, only because this is where the majority of the teams lie, but there are some really good teams that I don't want to overlook that in these four conferences that we've started with. Anything you want to add? Yeah, for Jimmy Teed. Well, yeah, and we're gonna definitely jump back into the Great Plains and the NCRHL once bids come out. But we've got the West Coast as well, and we're gonna jump into the West Coast, and then we'll get into the Midwest and the East Coast, which I know Corey Eisenband will be hopping on for the East Coast portion of the recap. And out west was, I think, some more surprises for a lot of people that were able to follow the WCRHL Conference Championships. Now, when we look out west, I think Division Two was probably, I would say Division Two and Division Three both had some upsets, and I know that looking at scores and talking to some people that were out there, I mean, here's where I'll start. Division Two, only being a 4-team division, I, I think that Division Two in the West, from what I have seen and I know, probably the deepest division in terms of D2, probably anywhere. Now there may be better teams, in that 2 or 3 spot compared to, say, like a Chico State or a Fullerton. But San Jose State was the 4 seed. They went into the tournament 4-10-1 on the regular year on the regular season record with their regular season record. And being 4-10-1, you're thinking this team probably not going to be a very strong team. But we all know what San Jose State was able to do last year, and it was really without an upset against Cal Poly Pomona, who was a team that they played throughout the season out west, and was able to pull off kind of a miracle victory, if you will, out in North Dakota. A team that probably would have been able to compete for a Final Four, and a team that was consistently ranked towards the top nationally. They beat RIT, the national champions, in Division Two round robin play. So that's kind of shows you where they're at now. Same with Arizona. Arizona, another team that made a run last year, and Northern Arizona. And those 3 teams were the bottom 3 teams in the West regular season standings. Now, only 4 of the 6 teams ended up getting to go to the conference tournament. Northern Arizona and the University of Arizona were both on the outside looking in. U of A, a team that had a pretty good first weekend, going 3-0-1, but had to forfeit those 4 games due to an ineligible player. So that really dug them a hole, and they were trying to climb out of that all season long. But, they had a 3-goal loss against ASU D1, a 4-goal loss against ASU D1. So that just kind of shows you how good some of these West Coast teams are. Chico State was able to make it to all the way through the conference tournament, and ended up playing Cal Poly ended up playing Fullerton in the semi. Fullerton handled them pretty well, beating them 11-2, and Cal Poly just able to beat San Jose State 3-2. That got us to the championship. And Cal Poly, for sure, the top team in Division Two out west, a team that was in Division One prior to this year, and a team that I think could definitely make a run in Division Two. I mean, they're very deep. Another team that is able to come at you with a couple full lines. They play fast. They have guys that can score. They have good goaltending. So that's going to be a team to watch out for sure, out of the West. But Cal Poly able to defeat Fullerton in that final 7-1. And, as I mentioned, 11-3-1 on the regular season. And I think that they really are one of the most talented teams in the country. And a lot of guys that have been playing together, grew up playing together with the NorCal Extreme, playing in NCRHA tournaments and whatnot. Fullerton had a great regular season as well. They were finishing just behind them in the regular season, and Ron Best, one of the better goalies in Division II in the country. So Chico State, another bubble team. I think that they could possibly get a bid here. It's going to just depend on how the East shakes out, just because of the number of teams in the East. But that's D2. D3 was I think slightly more predictable, but maybe not at the very end. Cal was able to pull off a victory here in the tournament and beat Cal Poly Pomona 6-2 in the final. I don't know if that was necessarily where people would have placed their money on Cal. Pomona was consistently the best team throughout the regular season. They went 14-1, and their top scorer, Derek Rosas, had 67 points in 16 games. Garrett Griffin, who was a big part of their upset over San Jose State at Nationals last year, was one of the best goalies in the country in D3. And they did have to get through try to fight through the conference tournament without their second leading scorer, that's Ian Duffy. And they were not able to pull off the win, but obviously, getting that second place finish and a strong regular season has them in a good spot going into nationals. And if they're able to get Duffy back for nationals, that's going to be a top team in D3. But Cal, kind of a on the fence team. They squeaked into the conference tournament, but Delfino Varela, who had only played the minimum games to qualify for the conference tournament, he put up 28 points in 6 games going in, and this is a team that they'll give up a lot of goals, and they'll kind of play that back and forth, hope to outscore you game, but they were able to do it. And keep the goals against low throughout the tournament. So Cal could end up being a team to watch out for in D3 as well. Now, in D1, ASU defeated UC Santa Barbara in their best of 3. They were able to do that in 3 really good games. Chase Steele put up 33 points in 19 games in the regular season for ASU. And we'll get a little bit more into Division I since all those teams are going to nationals once we have the bids, and kind of get into those teams and those games, because I know that the guys that we have here with us have seen some of those teams play, especially out in the NCRHL, so as well as the ECRHA. And I want to jump right into here from here on. And I guess in Division IV, I don't want to forget Division IV. ASU was able to pull off their 6th Division IV title in 7 years, with a victory over Northern Arizona, who they smoked in the final. But a big deal for NAU to get to that game, because second year program or third year program rather, first year for their Division IV team, and they're able to get a second place finished in the West. But that was a division that was all ASU, and that's how it was throughout the season. So no surprise there. They'll be a top team in D4 going into nationals. Now, I know the guys that have been here hanging out on the call probably excited to really be able to contribute as to the best of their abilities as we get into the Midwest. Now, both Dominic Stankwitz and Ethan Clearfield played in the NCRHL this season, and have a lot of input, I know, on the happenings there. I think it probably makes the most sense to start in Division II. Ethan, I know that's where you play, and your team, Miami of Ohio, lost a heartbreaker, but made it all the way to the conference title championship game. What are your thoughts about how the tournament played out, and as a player, kind of give us a little bit of your insight in the conference championships out in the NCRHL this year.
Yeah, sure. Definitely a little bit of a heartbreaker for our team there at the end. We made an incredible run, and I was just kind of proud of my team and the way we advanced there, beating Western Michigan, who the East Coast in that poll had them ranked higher than us coming in, and we had split with them in the regular season. We beat them twice on the way there, so it was cool. They're a great team. I'm expecting all three, Miami, ourselves, Western Michigan, and Grand Valley, to make it to nationals and represent the Midwest. But the weekend was great. Dom too from Henry Ford. They played a D2 schedule this year after losing some players, some key players. Their captain went down at the beginning of the season, and they'll have a good shot at nationals too. So excited to get his opinion. But for our guys, yeah, beating Western, it was 5-3, and then an overtime game against them in the semis 5-4, and we had played Grand Valley earlier in that day, fell 8-2, and then to come back and take them to overtime, we actually had two goal leads. So broke our hearts a little bit there at the end that it didn't fall our way, but proud to be able to take a team that went to the Final Four last year in Division One to overtime in the D2 championship game, and hopefully waiting to see if we get a bid to nationals tonight. Also had some interesting stuff down in D3. DePaul and Michigan Tech declined their bids to come out to regionals. So it was a 3-game series between Akron and Ohio State. And even though Ohio State had looked like the better team this year earlier, Akron ended up winning the first 2 games and took home the conference championship there. So that was pretty cool. And you had a 3-game series down in Division 4. Michigan State took the first 2, both in shutouts. We played both those teams, Grand Valley and Michigan State, this year. Michigan State's goaltender is absolutely phenomenal, and he'll probably, along with a couple of their players who are really good and really good team there, carry them far in Division 4 this year. I'm expecting Grand Valley probably to get a bid as well. Yeah.
I want to touch on that really quick. I think that some of the teams, especially in the East, that may, they don't, in some of the smaller conferences, there's a little bit more crossover play. I wouldn't necessarily consider the NCRHL a small conference, but the East is one of the only conferences that's able to have a full regular season where you are pretty much only going to play teams in your division. Now with the new structure this year, that has changed obviously a little bit, and the D2 teams got to play Slippery Rock and Farmingdale a little bit. But when we talk about Division 4 and we talk about Michigan State and Grand Valley State, give us a little bit of insight into how good these teams are at a national level, and how good these teams are if they were to compete, in a Division 2 or a Division 3, regularly. Where would they fall, and kind of give us a little glimpse into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, just starting out with the Michigan State, and I know it's a little different in some of the other conferences, don't have to play their Division 4 teams, but as a smaller conference, Michigan State played a Division 2 schedule this year, and Grand Valley played a Division 3 schedule this year. So we actually got to see Michigan State twice. We actually fell both times to Michigan State this season, but they were both hard-fought games. We were up in both of them and kind of fell apart towards the end. But just to give you an idea of how good that Michigan State D4 team is, they could easily compete and be a top 10, top 12 D2 team in the country. As I think you could say that for a few of the teams in D4, your Bethels, your Lindenwoods, your Farmingdales, those big name schools at D1, their D4 teams are also really, really good. And then you've got a team like Grand Valley, who in D4 this year, I think they've fallen off a little bit from where they were in previous years, but they're still quite good. I had them in around 9 or 10 in D4 this year, so I expect them to do well at nationals. They were a little bit, they played well in D3 games, struggled a little bit more in D2. But to give you a little more context, Western Michigan split with Michigan State this year, Michigan State D4 as well. And I know Grand Valley had even a close game with their own D4 team as well. So those teams down in D4, they're definitely able to play up with the D2 and D3 teams, and they should make some noise at nationals.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to leave out Western Michigan. They've done a lot to build a deep program with two teams, as Grand Valley did. Kind of trying to replicate the success that Grand Valley's had over the past few years. And it's cool because I feel like in the Midwest, each of the programs kind of push each other and get better each and every year, which is always great to see. Now, Dominic, as another Midwesterner, I know you've got some ties to some other teams as well, but you guys are in an interesting situation as a junior college team. We talked about the D4 teams getting to play some of the other teams throughout the conference, and you guys get to do, a very pretty much get to do the same thing. And I know that earlier in the year, you guys also went out to the East and played a couple of games against some Division II teams out there. So tell us a little bit about your experience as a JC team and what you think of some of these NCRHL teams.
Hey, Dom, I don't want to interrupt you real quick, but no one can hear you on the podcast. I don't know if there's something up with your microphone. It's a little delayed, so give it a second. I'll check. No, man, your voice isn't coming through at all. I'm sorry. I'm sitting with my team here on the other side, and they have the podcast up, and it's not coming through.
And I can tell you that you're not muted on our end. So, and I can hear you. We can hear you perfectly, but we might have to. We'll have to see if there's something we can do on that end. Yeah, give that a shot, and we'll get you back on here in a second. Um, I know that as we continue to look at the Midwest, and we're about to get into the East here, I think both obviously Grand Valley and Miami, the two top teams in D2. You have Ohio State, who will be going, or Akron in Division III. And I know that in Division I, Michigan State coming out of the NCRHL as well. And we'll, as I mentioned before, get into Division I a little bit later in the show and do a little D1 recap on the season, as there were some interconference games throughout the year. A couple teams that made trips out east from the West Coast, a couple of teams from the East that made trips to California, and the Division I experiment this year, trying out a new format, I think ended up working out pretty well for some of these bigger programs who wanted to play a little bit stiffer competition and have some closer games throughout the season. And I think we were able to see that. Now, as we wait, and we'll see if we can get Dom back on here, hopefully, and talk a little bit more about the Midwest and about the JC division as well. We're going to go out to the East, and I think at what was probably there were not a lot of surprises when it came to championship weekend in terms of the favorites. I think we're able to pull it out, but I know that Corey Eisenband, who's with us from Endicott College, it wasn't always like this for the Gulls, and something that took years to get to the point where they're at now as one of the probably one of the favorites going into the national tournament. Even at the start of this season, I mean, I know that um, they had a good team, but I don't know if they knew they were going to have the roster that they ended up finishing the year with, and being able to dominate Oswego as they did in the final with an 8-0 win. We'll get into some of the other games in Division 3, and then we'll talk Division 2 as well. But let's start in D3. And Corey, glad you're able to be here, man. Congrats on the win, first of all. And I also just want to kind of pick your brain a little bit and see, where your head's at after the big win and after starting this program just a couple of years ago. Yeah, not suffering the same issues that Dom is. Yeah, I mean, I think to start, let's just start with your team and where you guys, we know where you guys were able to finish up, but after last season, just coming into this year, I know you were able to pick up a few guys this season that have really made an impact. Was this a team at the start of the season? Were you expecting to have this group of guys, or was this did this kind of happen on a whim? And how'd you get from where you guys were last year to where you are now? And it's been quite a journey for you guys, and um, I'm glad that you were able to kind of fulfill your goal when you started the program. Now, I hate to be a downer, but I'm getting some texts that you might be having some issues on your end with your sound too, which I'm going through here and trying to see. if there's anything on my end that might be causing this, but I'm not really seeing anything. Now I'm gonna kind of troubleshoot here and see if there's anything that we can do. I'm gonna try to bring Dom back on and see if that works, and if that does, then maybe we'll have an answer, Corey. Yeah, we will. Hold on for a second. We'll try to get you back on. Dom, are you there? Can we get you on? Let's see if you're working. And it looks like we might be having some issues there too. So running into some technical difficulties here, unfortunately, and we should be getting the bids here soon. So hopefully that will make things go a little more smoother on our end, and we can get those out to everybody, which I know is kind of the it's the whole reason we're here, and everybody excited to find out who's going to be getting to go to nationals. And we're gonna keep going with the East and talk a little bit about Division II, and we'll segue into that, and then hopefully we can get Corey back on, and wrap up D3 with him. Now in D1 we also had Slippery Rock and Farmingdale, and we don't want to forget those guys, as well as Division 4, who was another division that was a lot of Farmingdale and a lot of Slippery Rock throughout the regular season, and Farmingdale with 3 Division 4 teams. So it goes to show you the depth of that program. But when we look here at Division 2 in the East, a lot of teams, a really deep conference. And UMass was able to pull off the victory. They led the pack throughout the regular season, 16-2 record. They faced a really tough Westchester team in the NCRHA Championship game, but I would say that they handled them pretty well. They outshot them throughout the game, and they scored 3 goals early and were able to hold on to their lead. John Whitman in net for Westchester had quite a game while after he got through that first period, and a 3-0 defeat. Nothing to be ashamed of from Westchester's end, who was a real solid team last year and throughout this season as well. But they got hot towards the end and went on a little bit of a run to start the second semester, I should say, and then had a few losses to UMass and Cortland. But when they got to Feasterville to play out the conference championships, did what they needed to do to get to that last game, and they beat UMass. And they were going to have to beat them twice in order to secure that championship in the double elimination tournament. So not an easy feat to do against a team like that. Hard to beat the same team twice if it's a good team. And that's kind of where things fell in Division II for Westchester. Now UMass, a team that I would put towards the top of Division II nationally, and they should be a contender for a national championship this year. Do we have you guys back on, Corey, or are you there?
I'm here. I don't know if they can hear me on the podcast.
All right, we're gonna do a little research and do some intel and see if everybody listening to the pod here is able to hear you. So hold on one sec. We'll get some insight here from the scouts out in the crowd listening in.
Yeah, and let me know if you can hear me. I know my team's listening, so
I think they can hear you.
Yeah, it looks like it.
Dom, are you able to be heard as well? Let's see if we've got some text coming in. So
they can hear me too.
Good.
I just heard myself. Let's go, boys.
Good. Here we go. All right, guys. Glad to see it all coming together here right before we get these bids. So let's jump right back to where we were. We were talking a little bit about D2 in the East. UMass able to pull off the win over Westchester. It took 2 games for that to happen. Essentially, I mean, Westchester was coming in off the winner's bracket, it looks like, and had to play UMass in that last game. Now, Corey, you were there. Can you fill us in a little bit about D2 and how things shook out?
Definitely. I mean, being in D3, I don't know probably as much as someone that's actually in Division II, but I can say that, I know UMass was probably the favorite going in. And they obviously had a similar situation to us in terms of they lost that game to Westchester and went into the losers bracket and had to win their way back. So I think for them, they have a lot of close games. Division II this year has been really tight. And they lost a heartbreaker to Westchester and then winning that. I think they beat Stony Brook to get back to the final. So, being able to, I think they won that game in overtime actually. So winning that game in overtime gave them a little bit of confidence. And obviously in a competitive league, it's tough to beat a team twice in one day. So I think for UMass, they were just glad that they got another shot at Westchester, and they definitely didn't let that chance go.
Yeah, just a really deep team. UMass always able to bring a deep bench with a lot of guys that are able to put the puck in the net. Two guys with 60 points on the regular season, and pretty much most of their roster that was able to play in the playoffs, averaging a point a game. So just goes to show how deep this UMass team is, and as I mentioned before, fully expect them to be able to contend for a national championship in Division II. Now, when we look at the rest of D2, there are some really good teams that may be on the bubble when we talk about nationals bids. Now we look, I mean, if we can get into the 4 or 5 spot and you've got teams like Westchester and RIT in the 4 and 5 spot in the regular season coming out of the East. Now, those teams in the playoffs ended up, finishing in similar spots. RIT went 1-2 on the weekend. Cortland 2-2. They're another team that we haven't talked about. That's right there. They finished 3rd in the regular season, 12-5-1. But even teams like Robert Morris, Northeastern, Penn State, who finished under 500, but 16 points in 18 games on the regular season, and they lost to RIT. That was the game that knocked them out this past weekend at Sportsplex. But when we look deeper in the East in D2, any input or anything you want to add on some of those teams that may be maybe on the outside looking in, definitely bubble teams going into the tournament if they're able to get bids?
Yeah, definitely. I think Division II, at least with the Eastern Conference, they're the most competitive in terms from top to bottom. I mean, you look at a game like a UMass versus the Northeastern. Northeastern struggled at regionals this year, at least, and I know a lot of those guys were pretty close with them, and that's a really good team over there. The same with RIT, and it just goes to show how good this division is in Division II. How any team can win any game, similar to how it's been the last couple of years. That it's just, who's going to go out and play the style that can win a hockey game. So I don't personally don't know how they compare to some of the teams out west and in other divisions, but I can tell you that, the top 8 teams from the Eastern Conference could all hold their own at nationals. And that's not to say they're all going to get a bid, but it is to say that if they were to get a bid, that any of them can compete, for a really deep run at nationals. Even looking at a team like Penn State, who we've been competitive with the last 2 years in Division II, that's a team that goes out and they fight every game, and maybe they don't have the depth of every other team. I'm pretty sure they were low on numbers at regionals. But they're a team that they're going to go out. They have guys who can put the puck in the back of the net. And I think what puts a team like UMass ahead of them is just their depth. You watch UMass and it's just, they don't have maybe one guy. I mean, I know they have some of the guys that are at the top of the scoring sheets, but it looks like their whole bench can just play, and that's where their depth wins them a championship. And I think that's, the sole reason that they're apart from a team like Penn State or a team like Northeastern. But again, all 8 teams in the East, and even going lower than that, I'm sure some of the lower teams could compete nationally. So it's going to be really interesting to see who gets bids and who can really show up when they need to at nationals.
Yeah, I want to emphasize, to Corey's point, we had 2 games out of 14 on the weekend in Division II ECRHA at the Conference Championships. 2 games that were decided by more than 3 goals. Almost every single game, a 1 or 2 goal game, both on day 1 and day 2. And that just goes to show you how competitive these teams are with each other. You've got Stony Brook beating Cortland by a goal and then losing by a goal to UMass in overtime, as you alluded to earlier. And, so that's shows you just right there, Cortland and Stony Brook both able to compete and just, as Corey mentioned, just maybe not as deep as a team like UMass, but all these teams able to compete and able to win some games if they were to end up getting bids to nationals. So we'll have to see how that plays out here coming up soon when we get these bids in. Now, Division III, we'll get back to that because I know that that's where we kind of got cut off. And then I want to bring Dom back into the mix and get a little JC input and just another perspective as a goalie and someone that's been involved in the sport a lot. But let's start with D3 here in the East. Corey, beyond you guys and Endicott, I know you mentioned Oswego. Who is another team that you see being able to make some noise coming out of the East? Maybe a team that either challenged you guys throughout the year or was able to just kind of ride the coattails and of maybe a few of their guys and able to hang on and be competitive in games throughout the season, regardless of who they played.
Yeah, for sure. First, I know I got a lot of my team watching, so I just want to give them a little shout out. How you doing? But for the rest of D3, it is really a competitive division, competitive conference, and I think we see some larger differentiation in the scoring on you look at an 8-0 win for us, but it's really just, I think, some of the teams can play a good game and take a game off, and I think that's the difference between Division III and Division II. But you look at a team like Yeshiva, who we played in at regionals, and we beat them pretty handily, but 2 weeks prior we played them to a really, really close game. And you look at a team like Yeshiva that's going to go out there, and those are great guys. They work their tails off every single game. They got some real talent. Their goalie has played really well as of lately. I know that they struggled with their goaltending early on in the year, and he's worked really hard to get to the point where he's at. And I think that their team's really coming together and can make a good run at nationals if they're able to get a bid. But then you look at a team like Drexel, who's worked really hard, and they gave us a good game in New York at All-Star Weekend, and we didn't see them at regionals, but we know that they would have gave us a really tough test. Same with Hofstra, who they've been able to, they have two guys who can really put the puck in the back of the net. Maybe lack a little depth, but one game is one game when it comes down to it. And same with St. Joe's, they're coached well. I know their coach a little bit, and he's worked with them. I think they had a tough regionals, if I'm not mistaken, but that's not to say they're not going to get a bid and make a run. Really, I mean, even you look at a team like Temple, who was the 8th seed, who we played, we kind of pulled away in the third period there against them, but it was a real close game early on. They work really hard. They're a gritty team, and I think in Division III, you see a lot of these teams who might not have the skill that some of the top teams have, or a Division II team, and so you see a little more grit, a little more ice hockey mentality out there, which is an added element to the game.
A little dump and chase, if you will.
A little dump and chase, a little get puck feet. But it's fun, and for us, it's figuring out how to play against that style versus against some of the teams that play more roller hockey styles of play. So
I think that's always an interesting factor when you get, and even in Division II, you see that a little bit. And I know that's something you and I talked about with your team last year. That if you guys just played a little bit more roller hockey, that things would come together. And it looks like this year that's happened. I know Dom, as a JC team, you guys get to see a little bit of that as well. And I'm sure that you guys have some ice hockey guys that you've brought in, and you definitely get to play against some of those teams in D2 and D3 from the NCRHL. So from your perspective, what do you think about some of that, and how those games can kind of go either way, and maybe where some of those bubble teams are from the Midwest?
So right off the start, I'm just gonna recap. Us going into D2 this year, already knew what was gonna happen from the start. I knew Grand Valley was a good team, knew Western was a good team, and I knew Miami was gonna be better than they were the year before. So coming into it, I knew we weren't gonna win a lot. I dropped out of the goalie spot, so I took over some offense along with, again, Eric Collegiate. I actually lost my cousin Luke Damasio to an injury, so he'll be out for nationals. And then we also just lost another forward, so we're going to be down to 6 going into nationals. So, yeah, it's kind of developing our goalie from ice to roller was very difficult. I think there's still a lot that's going to need to be done to our team in order to even compete at the junior college level at nationals. I know Saddleback obviously has been on an extreme roll this season and just absolutely pumping teams left and right. And I know they were competing with Division I teams as well. After I looked at some of their games on the schedule.
Yeah, they have a very strong team, Saddleback, that's for sure. I want to say that they had beaten ASU and Santa Barbara at points in the season. They gave some trouble to some of the teams that came from out of state. They pumped Florida Gulf Coast, who, as I mentioned, was a really, really good team that was able to beat ASU and Santa Barbara. They lost to Lindenwood 9-6, and just that, yeah, they're a very good team. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Now West Valley, who played throughout the regular season, there wasn't a JC championship in the West, and unlike in the Midwest, I don't know, were you guys able to go? Did you guys play in the regional tournament?
Yeah, we did. And like I said, we kind of knew what was expected. Got dominated by Grand Valley, obviously, 8-0, and then got dominated by Western, 8-2. So I think every game in our division, even past the regional tournament, was either we get blown out or we blow a team out. So I think the only reason, yeah, I mean, I honestly don't know how to put it. When we played those Division 3 teams, it was more of a practice for us because we knew that going into Division 2, it was going to be tough even winning a game, getting shots on net, even controlling the puck. So we kind of used the D3 teams as a way to start to move the puck around,
Create your system
and set up a power play, set up a PK, let our goalie get some shots. Like, I know I hopped in net for a few games early on, and I played like Grand Valley D2 a few times just so, we would try to keep it close and we like wouldn't get blown out a game. But it's so tough. Losing a workhorse like my cousin, for example, to injury because he adds so much momentum and he has so much speed to it. But at the same time, it's kind of, we can't rely on certain guys to produce every game consistently. We need the whole team collectively to, feed into the momentum and, start pushing. And it all starts at practice. We got certain guys trying at practice. We have certain guys showing up late and not trying. So that's really gonna show in nationals whether we, get knocked out early or we make it to the championship. Because I know those teams are going to come in prepared. St. Louis is a better team than they were last year. Saddleback, obviously the exact same team they were last year. And then West Valley slowly blowing off, like, besides last year when they were good, So I hope going into it we're prepared. But like I said, all starts with practice. It's how consistent we play too as well. Because consistently through Division 2 on our side was kind of slacking off. So Grand Valley would have its games where they would keep it close. Western would slack off a few times. I think Miami was kind of consistent throughout the game or throughout their season. I think goaltending hurt them the most, but I can't say the goalie was bad. He just had to come from ice and go to roller, which I knew for me it was hard to begin with.
I want to touch on that. So when did you start playing goalie in roller? And I know you said, as you said, and I know just from looking at the stats that you had done both a little bit this year, but mostly skated out. So I want to touch on that. But first things first, we've got a lot of goalies that are listening in and people that have ice hockey buddies that are, maybe like a buddy or two that play goal in ice that are hesitant to play roller. We've seen teams that, everything from a team that could have been a really good team, maybe was not didn't have the goaltending that they would need to contend for a title. But if they did, like, that was the one missing piece. We've seen teams that didn't end up coming to fruition, clubs that maybe would have been able to field a team, but weren't able to because of that goaltending situation. So first of all, just touch on your background as an ice hockey goalie and when you started playing roller in the transition. And then how did you convince your current goaltender to make the switch? Because I think that is something that ails a lot of teams, and a lot of people that are listening to this, I'm sure, are shaking their heads thinking about the struggles that come along with finding a goalie sometimes.
Yeah, so I came from ice. I kind of got into roller after giving up trying to go play juniors for ice. So after the USHL Combine, I kind of was just like, there's really no point to continue on after that. So I kind of was hesitant on roller at first. But I was like, let's give it a shot. I worked at Canfield Arena at the time where I live, which is like 2 minutes away from my house. And I started skating there. No roller flies introduced to me at the time. So it was like super tough at the start trying to slide around. But I mean, at first I was just sticking. My pads were getting torn up. And then luckily I got introduced to roller flies, which, if a goalie has those roller flies on, they can honestly back me up and say it's it's an extreme change. You're able to move, you're able to get across the crease so much faster. You're able to do goalies out there, they know what the VH is. You can do post to post movements like so crisp now, even with the mission pads. I know there's one goalie, Michigan State D4 goalie, for example, the new goalie this year. He has the mission slide pads, and the kid is amazing. A great goalie. I think State's going to go really far in D4. He looks so smooth in net sliding around. And that is the big difference. I think personally becoming a good goalie compared to like a great goalie. Because I think I wouldn't have had the success I had last year in the NCRHA if I didn't have my roller flies on personally. But I've seen goalies prove me wrong at the same time. Michigan State's goalie, Rob, for example, doesn't use roller flies. And, he gets across the crease pretty well. He's also a bigger guy than me, so he has those longer legs. But I just think roller flies overall help me get to the point where I'm at today for roller, at least. And as for getting our goalie to play roller, it was my idea. I personally did not want to play goalie this season. I kind of wanted to play roller strictly to play out and score goals. Like that was the point. I was kind of getting sick and tired of playing goalie. It takes a toll on your body eventually. Like my knees are already getting shot and I'm 21. Like that's not supposed to happen.
No.
But
it's crazy.
Yeah, like I wanted to have a good time this year and win some games and score some goals. And
well, you did that. So that's what I want. That's something I've been wanting to talk to you about. Like I've seen this. Like, did you skate out before this? I mean, obviously, every goalie that's out there listening to this is like thinking, dude, I'm sick when I skate out. Like I'm, telling their team that, and everybody's kind of just like, all right, man, whatever. Like maybe one game a season for teams that have two goalies, like they'll let that guy skate out, maybe he gets a couple shifts, whatever. But you average 2 points a game. So, and at Nationals last year, and I've seen you play before, like you're a really good goalie. I mean, and I know you weren't just talking out of your ass when you talked about like the USHL Combine. Like you were always a good goalie, not the biggest guy out there, but an unreal goalie nonetheless. Like always able to make big saves. So for somebody that is actually a legit goalie, that probably said, yeah, I'm okay skating out, whatever. Like have you always skated out, or where did that part of the equation come in?
So I think I first skated out roller, God, I don't know, like 12 years old, maybe. And then the league I played in just completely dropped. So then it was like travel ice hockey all the way up to high school. So high school hockey, and then trying out for juniors. And then as I was working at Canfield, I would play like the beginner league player at first. And then I got kicked off that because it wasn't as competitive as I thought it would be. Like obviously beginner is kind of, a bad term to use, but I mean, they used it at the time. So I got moved up to a higher division and didn't dominate whatsoever. So I'd honestly use those games to practice. And I think this year, though, kind of rung a bell in my head to actually put effort into getting myself better and trying to help my team out more. So I would do the little things. So stay after practice, shoot, however many pucks after to work on my shot, because I know I'm not a big guy. So picking my corners and advancing that shot and how hard it could be and how quick it could be was really what I wanted to focus on. I'm a smaller guy. I have speed. I have decent hands. And I think the practice is where I really excelled in, and that's why I'm up there in points. And like I said, that's where everything comes in. Like as if you're a team, that's where practice is gonna make or break it at the long run. So like I said, like practice was really a big thing for me, and that's why I think I had the success I've had.
And I just wanted to at least like touch on that, because I think that that perspective is important to bring in. And as a goalie and a skater, you get to see a lot. So, and definitely a story we're sharing that we'll have to get into more as we lead up to nationals. But, there were some teams that you guys got to play this year, Ethan, some teams that you guys got to play as well. And one that I wanted to touch on real quick, and then I know, Ethan, you got a little bit of analysis to add as well, is Western Michigan. So we'll start with Ethan. What are your thoughts on Western Michigan? You guys able to beat them in overtime in that semifinal game. Quick word on them, and then any input you want to add. And it looks like we're going to start receiving bids here in the next couple of minutes.
Yeah, sure. On Western's got a really good team this year. I think they're expecting to make some noise at nationals. We played them earlier this season in 2 games before the regional championships, and we split with them. It was 7-5 the first time we beat them, and then they got us 6-4. I think they made a lot of improvement this year as well. They're a very fast team, and in our conference, I'd say they're probably like the deepest, most consistent team. They don't really have a guy where it drops off. They're fast the whole way through, and everyone's a good player. I wouldn't say that they have like that standout superstar that you might see points wise on our roster or Grand Valley or some of the other top teams, but they're just consistent all the way through, and I think that really helps them with their depth, and that'll show at nationals for sure. They'll probably end up in that C or D pool, but I wouldn't be surprised if they came out as a 1 seed or 2 seed out of their pool. And then since you were saying some of the bids are coming in, I just thought maybe we could all touch on some of those bubble teams before they come out, and maybe talk about which teams we think are maybe last ones in, first ones out. Could be interesting for some of the viewers out there.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely something that we want to talk about and touch on here. And let's start with you. I think that you've gotten to see a lot of teams this season, both in the East and the Midwest. So when you're looking at the board here, we know that most likely looking like 16 teams in Division II now. This isn't 100%, but this is what was supposed to be. This was what I was told was expected. Now it's possible that this changes, but most likely 16 in D2, 20 in D3, 12 in D4, and then all 8 teams in Division I, and probably the full slate of JC as well. So D2 and D3, let's start there.
Yeah.
What are you thinking?
Yeah, sure. So those are the numbers that I've heard and kind of rumored also. So I think I also just wanted to add that tournament that got canceled with the storm in December or January probably really hurt the league, because I think that was that major East Coast interregional. A lot of Midwest teams were supposed to come over there, and it would have been good to see where some teams fell. So that definitely hurt. But we did get a chance to go over to the East Coast, play a couple of those teams. I think right now your bubble teams in D2, I was looking at Chico State and Penn State. I'll be really interested to see where the committee draws the line there, as I think I have them 16 and 17 on my list. We got a chance to play Penn State. I know Corey touched on them earlier. When we played them, we beat them pretty handily, but I know that they've played some other teams. They had upsets against RIT. They've stuck in there, took teams to overtime. Like I believe they may have taken Westchester, potentially Stony Brook, maybe even Northeastern, just some close games there. So it's definitely a team in Penn State that I could see the committee potentially giving a nod to, but I could also see them with that record in the East, which is a strong conference, just falling outside and that like first alternate spot at 17. So that'll be really interesting if they do end up taking 16 teams, a couple of those bubble teams, Chico State, maybe those other lower teams, Robert Morris, Northeastern, Florida State, since Kennesaw got the auto bid, are all going to be right on that bubble there to see which teams the committee takes from D2. And then moving down into D3, when I was looking it through, you had Denver, who slid in there with those wins this past weekend, and then the forfeit by Colorado in the regionals. And so you have, oh yeah, that's my picture. Thanks, Kev. Um, you've got some teams, a couple in the West that I think are right on that line there. A couple in the Great Plains, teams like James Madison, Missouri S&T are going to be right on the line. St. Joseph's and Temple, which Corey touched on earlier, I have them right on that bubble as well. If they're taking 20 teams out of the East, out of total out of D3, should be really interesting. I just wanted to give a shout out to a couple of teams. Cortland and Hofstra went all the way out to the West Coast this year, and it gave the committee a lot of insight into comparing those leagues, because I know how hard it is when you don't get a chance to see teams play each other out of conference. You use those games. Like, we played Cortland, and Cortland went out to the West. So I know in D2, Cortland's kind of been like that standard point where the committee can kind of look and see how Cortland did in the East and compare the Midwest teams in the West. So that's really important. Those interregional games are super helpful for deciding things. Other teams right on the bubble, maybe Illinois State might squeak in there in D3. Yeah, and then you got that surprise out of Cal, who gave themselves a berth there, upsetting Pomona, which was pretty cool to see out there in the West. So how about you, Kev? What do you have on your bubble?
Well, I think the East is where it gets the most interesting. I mean, that's got to be a nightmare to figure out. Let's start in D2. I mean, if we look across the board, I think we've got probably 3 or 4 for sure out of the West. I think that the top 4, those 4 teams that made it to the conference championships out of the West will all get in. Kennesaw and Florida State should be good. Grand Valley, Miami, Western, I would imagine all get to go. So right there, you're looking at 9. That's 7 spots left across the board. And there's going to be 2 of those teams gone with auto bids, Kansas State and UMass. That leaves 5 spots for and granted, this is guerrilla math, and I think you could make an argument that one of the teams that has been named so far doesn't get in, but that would leave 5 spots for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 teams in the East that look to possibly get in. Now that would put I'm right where you are at that point. That's probably means that you've got teams like Robert Morris, Northeastern, Penn State, maybe a Rowan, possibly, depending on which teams accept bids and whatnot. And then you also have a couple of teams like I don't think Mizzou will be in the running there, but I mentioned the West and how good the West is. NAU 2-11, 0-2. They didn't get in, and they really struggled towards the end of the season, and they forfeited 2 games as well. The last day of the Arizona event, they had a couple of guys that were down with injuries, their goalie, and they didn't want to play those games. They ended up just making the trip back up to Flagstaff. But, this is a team that lost to Saddleback 4-3 in overtime. They lost to Fullerton 4-3 in overtime in their last regular season weekend. And they lost to Santa Barbara by 3 goals. They beat San Jose State in their last game of the year. So, that just goes to show you how competitive the West is. We've talked about how competitive the East is, but there's a possibility that even a team like that gets in, and there's no doubt that they would be able to be competitive if they were to make it. So that's kind of the way I look at it. I don't know if they'll get a bid. If they're probably my last one out, or second to last out. It's going to be those couple of teams in that 5 through 7 spot in the East, 5 through 8, and then maybe like an NAU. That's kind of what I'm envisioning. How about D3? What do you see? What do you see in D3?
Yeah, just to add to your point right there on NAU, who was in the Final Four of the D2 last year. So I'm obviously not out west, didn't get a chance to see them, but had so many question marks about what happened to their program this year because I thought they had a shot to win the national title going into this year. But hopping into D3 and just pulling up the standings here on the website. You're talking in the East Coast, and my bubble teams were Temple and St. Joseph's. Temple had a nice end of their season. They actually pulled off 2 big wins against, I believe, Yeshiva and maybe either Hofstra or Drexel. I'm just checking now, which was good to see. And then they played St. Joseph's earlier in this year and lost 3-2. And those are my last 2 teams from the East. I'm interested to see if 1, 2, or neither of them get in. But it'll be interesting to see which way the committee went with that since Temple has the better wins, but St. Joe's actually beat them head-to-head earlier in the season. It looks like their Temple's win was against Hofstra. So they have 1 against Hofstra and 1 against Yeshiva in overtime earlier this season. So in D3, that's kind of where my attention was going in the East Coast. We didn't get to touch on it too much earlier, but in the Great Plains, those 2nd and 3rd seeds, Illinois State, Missouri S&T, maybe only one of them gets in, potentially both. But it'll be interesting to see there too, because S&T did advance to the championship game. Maryville obviously has the auto bid there. Out in the Midwest, we had something crazy happen with the bids will come in, but Akron won, and then Ohio State has the auto bid due to forfeiting of I believe an illegal player. But Akron did end up winning the championship there, so Ohio State is going. That's interesting out in the Midwest to see if Akron will maybe get a second shot at it or not. And then expecting both Colorado and Denver to go since Denver got the auto bid. One team I hope gets a chance to go is James Madison, but like I said before, I have them right on the bubble. And then you have a team like Texas Tech who won 7 games this year, but 6 of them were against Louisiana Tech, who went 0-12, and 1 was against Sam Houston State. So does the committee look at that and say 7-5 is good enough? When they only get a chance to play 2 teams, and Sam Houston State was dominant out there. And then obviously the West Coast, where I think you could make a case for almost all the teams there, even UCLA, who sits down at the bottom. You can make a case for them. But I'd be interested to see between Long Beach State and UC Irvine if both of those teams get in or if it's only one that the committee ends up taking. So definitely some interesting things happening in D3 as the bid should be coming in shortly, and we'll actually get to talk about who is going instead of speculating.
Yeah, and that's always part of the fun of doing this is there's always a little bit of time to kill, and that always leads to some interesting speculation. Needless to say, I think that you're spot on with a lot of the stuff that you talked about in D3. I think mentioning James Madison, an interesting team there. Same with Texas Tech. In the West, like you said, I mean, UCLA was they were the 5th team in D3 in the West, and they they had some good games throughout the season. They had a couple that were not as that were not quite as good, and they didn't get to compete at the West championships, at the WCRHL championships. But they had some wins over Irvine and Long Beach State, and that's just once again shows you how competitive and close some of these teams are. Now Hofstra handled a team like that pretty well, so as you alluded to before, that probably bodes well for Hofstra, and the fact that they took the initiative to travel out west and got a couple of wins, and had good close games with Pomona and Cal. They lost 5-2 to Pomona and 7-3 to Cal. So that kind of is another glimpse into where the West and the East teams sit, at least in Division III. Dom, do you have anything to add here on bubble teams? Anything that comes to mind when you're thinking about some of these teams that may end up getting in or might not?
I think the only thing I really can put some info in is if Akron does make it if they have the goaltender that they had for our regional tournament, I honestly think they have a good shot at Division 3. I know they lost a few guys this year that they had last year, and their goalie that they had the first semester did not come back the second semester. Which they had to bring on a different goalie. I don't know who he was, but he.
To add to Dom's point there, I'm pretty sure, that created a little bit of controversy out in the Midwest. But I believe that based on the number of games that goalie played, who was very good for Akron and helped them take the championship there, regionals over Ohio State, that he won't be eligible for nationals because I don't think he has enough games. I think their league requires 7. So Akron's if they get a bid there, they're gonna be scrambling to find a goalie. But if we want to touch on, if we want to hop over to Division 4 potentially, so we don't leave those guys out. Maybe we're getting some comments in the section about some other teams that people want to hear about. I'm sure there's some D4 players who are listening in. Kev, if you want to maybe start on that and talk about some of the D4 teams and some interesting things that are happening there.
Yeah, D4 is always a deep division. At least there's kind of a divide. I would say it's deep. The top 4 teams are usually very competitive with each other, and then after that, there's usually some really good parity as well. But some of the bigger programs definitely stand out in terms of what they're able to bring to the table. Now, we talked earlier in the program, we touched on ASU out west. They're the favorite, and I think that they'll have a good team going into nationals, but they're the teams that everybody really is looking at in terms of the powerhouse teams are always, at least the past couple of years, have been Farmingdale and Lindenwood. But Bethel this year was able to beat Lindenwood in the conference championships. So that adds a whole nother element. And Bethel's always been solid in D4, but I think that just makes this year in D4 that much more interesting. I know that when we look at the Midwest, Grand Valley State and Michigan State, both teams that are usually able to come and compete at nationals. This year, it was Michigan State who got the better of Grand Valley, but both those games at the conference championships were close, 2-0 and 3-0 games. Did you get to watch any of those games, E or Dom?
Yeah.
Either of you guys?
Yep. Yeah. I've gotten a chance to follow along pretty closely with some of the D4 teams. Sorry, I was just getting an update here from someone. But yeah, I think you've got some interesting things happening all across D4, especially with like the rule that Farmingdale out in the East can only have 1 team go. I was initially anticipating them having 2 teams go, but the league's only saying that 1 can go. So that added another spot for a team maybe out west to have a shot to go. I think like we talked about earlier on the 2 Midwest teams, I think both Michigan State and Grand Valley deserve a spot there. My focus was definitely on the West Coast teams if they're going to take 12 from D4, because you had a lot of competitive games between Cal Poly Gold, UC Santa Barbara, Arizona, and Northern Arizona. It was to the point where teams were like beating each other. One team was 3-1 against another, and then they were 0-2 against another. And it just resulted in a whole mix up there where I had those teams about 11, 12, 13. So I was interested to see what the committee came up with there. But Kev, I don't know if you've got any updates. I'm getting some updates potentially from the Midwest that the bids might be coming in. So do you have them? Do we want to go there?
We do. Yeah, we've got the bids now ready to go. So we're gonna get ready to throw those up on the screen for everybody and go through them right off the bat. Now, if you want to follow along at home, feel free to visit the NCRHA website, and we're going to be bringing those to everybody as well on our screen here in a second. Now, I think that to start, we'll go through Division I and just work our way down. Yeah, this is kind of the moment everybody's been waiting for. So we're right now going to find out the teams that are going to be making the trek out to Rochester and competing for a 2019 Collegiate Roller Hockey National Championship. So let's get right to it. In Division I, we've got all of the Division I teams received bids. So that's going to be Arizona State, Bethel University, Farmingdale State College, Florida Gulf Coast University, Michigan State University, Slippery Rock University, and UC Santa Barbara. That is all 8 of those Division I teams this year will go out to Rochester, and we'll get to play for a national championship. Now, Division II, we've got all of our bids and our alternates as well, and we're just getting those up on the screen for you guys, so you can see them as we announce them. And it looks like we should be able to pull those up right now. So in Division II, Cal Poly, as we mentioned before, they're the West Coast champs. Cal State Fullerton, they took second there in the West. Florida State, Grand Valley State, Kansas State, and hold on, guys, we're just trying to make sure that we have are able to show you guys so you can see at home. There we go. Kansas State University, out of the Great Plains. Kennesaw State, they won the SEC this year. UMass, the ECRHA champions. Miami University, there you go. Congratulations, sir.
Thanks. Go Red Hawks.
Northeastern University, out of the East, another one of those teams deep. We've got some sounds there from the fans back home. I know there's some watch parties going on.
Can you hear my guys in the background?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Definitely. They're rowdy for sure. That's what we like to see. That's what it's all about, you know? So, you know, that's why we're here. Northeastern, Robert Morris, RIT, and Stony Brook, 4 East Coast teams there back to back. San Jose State University, Cortland, another East team, Westchester, and Western Michigan are alternates in Division II. Penn State, University of Arizona, NAU, and Rowan. All good teams that are alternates, and if any of those Division II teams end up not making the trek out to Rochester, RIT, are you guys going to be there? You know, I know it's a far trek. I wouldn't be surprised to see one of those alternates competing and making some noise, surprising some people if they were to end up going. But a really strong field in Division II. Now we're gonna go to Division III, and hopefully we can get those up for everybody as well here. All right. So in Division 3, we'll start at the top. Cal Poly Pomona, Long Beach State University, Cal, the champs out west, University of Colorado, University of Denver. So both of the Rocky Mountain teams getting bids. Both teams that traveled to Missouri and played some interconference games this season. Drexel University out of the East, Endicott College, the NCRHA champs in D3. Hofstra University, Illinois State, James Madison, Maryville, and Missouri S&T, a couple of teams there from the Great Plains and as well as the SEC. Right here we've got Illinois State, a Great Plains team, Maryville, and Missouri S&T. Some real strong teams there. Ohio State University, Sam Houston State out of the SCHL, St. Joseph's, who you mentioned, or I know Corey had talked about a little bit. A real deep team with some good coaching and a team that puts in a lot of work. So good for those guys. Oswego, not a surprise for the ECRHA folks who were able to see them be the only team to knock off Endicott this year. Syracuse University, Temple, Virginia Tech, and Yeshiva, rounding out the field with some more East Coast teams. And then you've got Virginia Tech here, who comes out of the SEC. So both of those SEC teams getting to go. Good for those guys. And James Madison, another team, this is their first full season in the NCRHA. They played as an affiliate or might have played a couple of events last season, if I remember correctly. But big deal for those guys getting to go. So congratulations to them and to all the teams that got bids in Division 3, the alternates, Akron, Louisiana Tech, UCLA, and Cornell. Now on to Division 4. Now, and I know there's some definitely a lot of things we could talk about there in D2 and D3. We want to make sure that we keep going and can't forget about D4 as there are a lot of teams that are going to get to go in D4 and represent their schools and their programs. And I think one of the coolest things with D4 is getting to see really how programs are built, because to be able to field one team is a challenge. To be able to field two is quite an accomplishment when it comes to club sports. And then on top of that, to be able to have two teams that are able to compete and represent your school and go to nationals is a really special feeling for everybody involved. So, and it makes for quite an experience as a club. That's for sure. So in D4, we've got a 12-team field that will be making the trip to Rochester, New York. Arizona State University, Bethel University, Cal Poly, Farmingdale, Florida Gulf Coast, Florida State, Grand Valley State, Lindenwood, UMass, Michigan State, Slippery Rock, and UC Santa Barbara. So you've got a couple of West teams in there. You've got both Michigan State and Grand Valley out of the Midwest, which we've talked about. Bethel, the Great Plains champs, Lindenwood, who has always had a really strong Division 4 team or secondary team. And a lot of these teams familiar to making this trip out. UC Santa Barbara, a team that I don't think has been out for a couple of years in Division 4, but has always had a really good D4 team. NAU, Stony Brook first, I should say, is the first alternate. NAU, Northeastern, and Rochester Institute of Technology, RIT, rounding it out the 4 alternates. Now, we also have JC, and I'm going to put that up here in a second. And then we'll go to Ethan and Dom, and we'll go to Instagram and Twitter as well. So if you have some thoughts you'd like to share, feel free to get at us on Twitter or on Instagram. And hopefully you guys can see the D4 bids, and I hope that you were able to see all of them. We're gonna make sure we put them all back on the screen, but we're gonna get the JC teams up here as well. And 4 JC teams making the or getting bids, I should say, out to Rochester. We've got Henry Ford. Dom, congratulations, sir. Saddleback College, St. Louis Community College, and West Valley. Those are your 4 teams in the JC division that will hopefully be making the trek out. So bids are out. You can get your bid information at ncrha.org. Make sure you get on that and you respond as soon as possible, and make sure you don't miss that deadline, that cutoff to accept your bid, which is going to be here in the next couple of days this week. You need to make sure you accept your bid by 11 p.m. Eastern on this Wednesday. And if you go to NCRHA, you'll be able to access the paperwork and feed to your acceptance to the league. And we hope to see everybody out in Rochester. It's going to be a great tournament. A lot of teams that we were expecting to make it, maybe some surprises as well. I'm going to throw it over to Ethan here and see what he thinks. Dom, if Dom's still there as well, and we can get some input from those guys. Ethan, what are your thoughts here as we see these bids and start talking and breaking things down about the upcoming national tournament?
Yeah, sure. I think probably one of the most interesting things that I'm looking at so far is what I'm guessing is some West Coast teams declining to make the trip all the way out to Rochester. You've got San Jose State, who snuck in there in D2, I think, instead of Chico State. I'd be interested to see if that was due to a decline. And then San Jose State, I said, was either, San Jose State and Penn State were those next 2 up, and Penn State looks like they got the first alternate. So looks like potentially same thing could have happened down in D3. I was scrolling through the list. Irvine, unless I missed it, doesn't look like they're on there. And they were right on that bubble too. So potentially declining to come out from California. It's expensive to travel all the way across the country to come play. And so you're getting some teams there who are really going to get a shot and get a chance to prove themselves at nationals that, maybe just slid in, but it's exciting. I think D2, D3, it looks like for the most part, they got things right. My biggest interest is in alternate 2 and D3 with La Tech. Nothing against those guys. They have had a great team for the past couple of years, and it looks like it just fell apart a little bit this season. But if a couple of teams decide to decline their bids and La Tech gets a chance to go, maybe they'll do better against some teams outside of their own conference. But that's got to hurt for those guys in UCLA and Cornell, who are below them, who had some wins this season. So some interesting things from the West Coast and in some of the alternate positions for sure.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that always happens. And, there are a lot of variables and factors there as to whether teams trip out. Something that has to make that decision. And you hope that each club has the resources or finds a way to be able to pull it off. And there is, there are a lot of creative fundraising, that I've seen over the years. And ultimately, I think that really want to make it work, you'll find a way to pull it off and be there. And that's something that, every team, as I mentioned, has to kind of wrestle with and figure out if it's what they want to do. But I know that some of the alternates, looking at Division II, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that U of A ended up over NAU. I'm not too surprised, I should say. Based on the last weekend, that might be a factor, or that was something that I thought might have been a bigger factor. But NAU lost the season series to U of A 3-0, And there's no doubt that plays into it. And as I mentioned, U of A had some really good games against some D1 teams as well. So those are both teams that if they end up sneaking in, if a team or a couple of teams decline their bids and NAU and U of A make the trip out, two teams to watch out for. And I know, Ethan, you talked about how about the success that those two programs saw last year in Division II at nationals. Division III, we've got a lot of I think like a lot of depth in Division III and a lot of teams that we just don't really know a whole lot about. So Division III, I think it's going to be great to have this division this year and see things shake out. I mean, I think it's safe to say that Endicott is the favorite going in, but there are going to be some teams that are going to bring some competitive games. And we saw Oswego beat them at the conference championships in the NCRHA. So not an unbeatable team, a very good team, no doubt, but not an unbeatable team. And we've got some good West Coast teams in Cal and Pomona and Long Beach that will be making the trip. A couple of Colorado schools in there. And then, Maryville, I think, will be solid. I think that there are going to be, I think Sam Houston State, they had a good team last year and made some noise at nationals and a couple of the games they played in. And Syracuse, they've got a really good team too. There's so many good teams out of the East. So I'm going to miss, I know I already left a few out, and that just shows you how good the East is, which we talked about earlier tonight. Division IV, I think that the favorites are probably some of the big schools that you would expect, of Farmingdale, Lindenwood, Bethel, ASU. And then, from there you get into teams like Grand Valley. You've got your Florida schools, FSU and Florida Gulf Coast. Michigan State and Grand Valley should both be really solid, as I mentioned. But that's another division. UMass had a good team this year. Slippery Rock had a really good team in D4. So that's a whole nother can of worms as we get, into the pool B and C of D4 and how those could end up playing out. But that's pretty much it for the night as far as we go. We'll be doing a lot more and be a lot more active here leading up to mid-April, when the national championships will be held. And hopefully we can get to talking to a lot of you guys that are going to be making the trip out to Rochester and get some feedback and analysis from across the country. I think that there's going to be a lot of good roller hockey to be played here in the preparation up to nationals and definitely once we get out there. And I don't know, it's a special time of year for sure, and something that I look forward to every year, and I know a lot of guys really do. And the NCRHA is a really special league, and they do a great job putting together, what is no easy task to put together something like this. And I think that year after year, they continue to do it just to do things the right way. And it's great to see, and allows a lot of people to be part of something really special. I want to let both Dom and E give their closing thoughts here. Dominic, you still there?
Can you hear me?
Good? Yeah.
All right. Awesome. I honestly can't wait to see how Division I, Division II, and Division IV play out. Mostly because of the new restructuring. I can't wait to see how our Midwest teams are going to do. I think the boys at Grand Valley, Miami, and Western are going to make us proud and go pretty far there. And I hope Michigan State competes with the best of the best, playing Bethel, Farmdale, and Lindenwood. I really can't wait, and we're gonna have a great time in the junior college division, taking on pretty much a Division I team, Saddleback. So that's gonna be fun. But yeah, I can't wait for the experience to watch some great hockey, and hope I can film and take some photos there too for the rest of the roller hockey community to watch and enjoy. So can't wait.
You've been doing in the Midwest this year has been great, and I know that everybody would be excited to have that have you be able to bring some of that to the national tournament. So looking forward to that for sure, and getting to catch up with you the tournament, get to talk JC, and just talk a little bit about roller hockey and your involvement in it. So really appreciate you coming on this Selection Monday show and being able to contribute from a bunch of different perspectives, really, as a goalie and a skater and someone who's involved in building a program and a JC team at that, which is no easy task. And to get, your program ready for nationals 2 years in a row, definitely says a lot. So I just want to make sure that, that how big of a deal it is that you guys are getting to do this again, and congratulations. And we're really glad that we were able to have you on tonight.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Always a fun time talking to you.
All right. Well, Dom, that's Dominic Stankiewicz from Henry Ford College. Dom, we really appreciate it. And Ethan Clearfield from Miami of Ohio. What are your closing thoughts here as we wind down the Selection Monday show?
Yeah, Kev, I just want to say thank you so much for having me on. I love roller hockey and I love talking about it. It's been a privilege to talk with some other guys who really love the sport and get to share in this exciting night. And everyone who is tuning in, we'll give a shout out to the guys from Maryville. I've been watching the chat. So a couple of teams there, and it looks like we missed RIT talking a little bit about them. So shout out to a couple of those teams who stuck with us through the chat and were watching on the Selection Monday show. I'm a senior this year. It just means the world to me to get a chance to play for a national title with my team. We're all super excited to go, and I think it's going to be really competitive. This is exactly what the league wanted, getting a more competitive lineup in all the divisions, and I think it's going to make for some really good hockey up in Rochester. And it might be a little bit cold, but it'll be fun in the rink, and I think everyone's going to have a really good time. And yeah, I'm just excited. Can't thank you enough for having me on tonight.
Hey, I didn't even realize that we had this live chat enabled, which that just goes to show you. Now we're gonna I want to look at that real quick before we sign off. And I don't know if you're in a hurry, but I definitely don't want to miss. We didn't want to miss anybody, and I think RIT well, definitely RIT. That's a team we definitely don't want to forget. I mean, they're the defending national champs in Division II, and we talked about programs being built and getting stuff going off the ground, started from the ground up. RIT is a program that's been around for a long time, but they had a couple of years of a hiatus where they weren't involved with the league at all, and then got involved again as an affiliate team. The ECRHA used to have Division IV, what they called Division IV, which was kind of like a intro to the league opportunity for teams that maybe wanted to play, just play in their conference or play a couple of tournaments. And that's how RIT was able to get back into things. And now you have this a really strong program there. And their Division IV team might end up even getting to go, depending on how the bids shake out. Maryville, once again, I think, I was talking to Ryan Dunn about them. He's on Denver, made the trip out, played those guys, said that that's a really good team, somebody to watch out for. If we definitely are going to follow up with some more analysis after tonight. So I want to make sure that everybody knows. We'll be bringing some more coverage to you guys. We'll have a national rankings coming out. with input from all 7 conferences as well. And in preparation of the national tournament. And I think that there are a lot of highlights here and a lot of things that that we weren't able to discuss that we want to get into over the next week or two. So we'll make sure that we do that. And really appreciate everybody coming on. Ethan, thanks so much, man, for everything you do for the sport and for joining us tonight. Congratulations on the bid. And I know we'll be talking soon, and hopefully we can have your insight and analysis leading up to nationals.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kev.
Yeah, you got it, man. And that's going to be it for us. Everybody that tuned in, we really appreciate it. We're just trying to make sure that we add a little bit of excitement to the night as guys try to figure out if they're going to be able to make that trip out to Rochester. And we're really glad that you guys were able to join us. So hopefully we will get to talk to you guys soon. As I mentioned, we'll be doing a little bit more in terms of coverage leading up to nationals. So make sure you check us out. Check out ECRHA Players. They've been doing some great work, and we can't forget the guys at Roller Dad News. They've been doing some of the best coverage that I've seen on the sport, really in quite a while, in years. So it's great to have Roller Dad News going. It's great to have ECRHA Players and guys like Dom who shoot video out in the Midwest, and everybody that has contributed to adding some extra elements to the presentation and to the league, and really bring the Players League to everybody. So thanks a lot, guys. We here at Coast to Coast appreciate you taking some time out of your night to join us, and we'll hopefully be talking to you guys soon.